Okay, this tutorial is going to be a brief overview on the new Remote Falcon template. This template is designed to make it a little bit easier to modify and customize it to what you want, and to make it a little bit easier for people that are fairly new. And it's also designed to be up to format a lot better. I'm not going to go into details on CSS coding, but a basic overview. If you want more details, you might want to check out w3schools.com for tutorials on just about anything that's CSS related. We got a really good website with tutorials on all different types of things that might be beneficial for you. The first thing that you're going to need is some sort of text editor. Notepad++ is a good option, but you have to be careful because there are other text editors out there that will save the HTML files in a format that it's not compatible for web pages. Uh, Notepad++ is does work and is compatible, so that's an option to go through. You can also use an HTML editor, but there's also warnings with that too. Some HTML editors will try to fix your code for you if you don't have valid HTML code. In order for Remote Falcon to work properly, there has to be some code in your template that is not valid HTML code. But Remote Falcon will replace that code with the correct code when it gets displayed. So if you're using one that fixes the code for you, it will actually break your web page. I use brackets in VS Code. VS Code is more robust but requires more setup. Um, Brackets is nice because you can see an immediate change on the web page, which VS Code does as well if you download a module. Now that the intro is done, let's dig into the template itself. This is just a quick tutorial on how to use the new template. The new template is designed to look good on all devices and make it easier to modify, especially for the newer users. With the old format, things wouldn't look good on different devices, but with the new one, here's how mine looks. If you go on a cell phone, you see that it fills the whole page correctly. Song list, the things will line up correctly. This just shows the messages, and if you go on a wider screen, it still shows up correctly. It will expand it to fit correctly. Narrow screen, wider screen, they all look good depending on how it is. It'll automatically expand and shrink things to fit the way that you want it, even all the way down on a full-size screen. The new template is not fully responsive, as I felt that that would introduce more complexity than most users would need and create more code that, if it wasn't modified correctly, would cause more problems. Just a FYI, responsive web pages will display different content depending on the size of the display window and the device that is displaying the web page. For example, on my web page, if the screen is full size, you get all of the menu options that you see up here. But if the page gets too small, it will revert to a menu type screen where you get the navigation that you can go through and get there. Another thing is it will even display different images depending on the device and how it works. For example, if you're viewing this on a full-size computer and you scroll, the image will stay and the text will scroll up behind it. But if you're on a mobile device, that picture would actually scroll up with the whole page as a normal page would. So you can have it displayed differently depending on a lot of different variables. That way it looks good on all devices. The template here isn't fully responsive, but it does look good on all devices. Okay, at the top of the template, do not delete this first line. This first line here is to tell Remote Falcon that this is the new template and it will actually process it a little bit differently. So you don't want to delete that. There are several sections that have comments in them, and depending on the section, the comment style is different. I'd suggest that if there's a section that you don't think you need, just comment that section out instead of deleting it. In case you change your mind later, you might want to put it back. CSS uses a forward slash and an asterisk like that to begin a comment, and then you have to end the comment with a closing asterisk and forward slash. So when you start it and end it, and the nice thing with brackets is it will show things commented, and if we delete this, you'll see that now this gets grayed out, so it's a comment because we didn't close our comment. HTML, on the other hand, uses the greater than sign, the exclamation point, and 2 dashes to start a comment, and to end a comment it uses 2 dashes and the less than sign. So depending on the section, you might have to use comments a little bit differently. So the style section, which is a section that starts with the style and ends down here with the closing style tag. This is the section where you will define pretty much how the web page looks. And it might be a little overwhelming for some people, but it really isn't that bad. But that's where you do it. In CSS, there's a hierarchy of how things get formatted. The first section here is your base configuration to kind of do the overall design of it. You probably don't want to do much here short of changing the font family and maybe the font color. The text align center maybe, but probably won't need to do too much there. The body section is used to define the main page, such as the background color and a background image if you want it. If you're going to use any images in your web page, make sure they are hosted on a secure server, and that's one that starts with an HTTPS in the location. Many browsers will not display images that are not secure when viewing a secure website. So your images, if they're not posted on a secure web page, they probably won't show. In the base image, it only sets the background color to black. I would caution about setting your background or background image to anything light colored, since people will be usually viewing your page in the dark, so you don't want to blind them. This section is where you would configure a background image if you want. There are dozens of ways to display your image. I'll show one example. So if I want the background image, so you see here, this is just the standard black background. If you want to configure a background image, then you would get rid of the comments to make the image to be images Holly left, and if you hover over it, it'll kind of show you what it is. I want this image, since this image is kind of like a ribbon, I want it to repeat, but I only want it to repeat going down. I don't want it to repeat across, so I'm going to make that repeat -y. And the background size, I want it to go, the width is going to be 100% because I want it to go all the way across. But I want the rest of it to be auto. And the background color really isn't going to affect it because this image, because it's 100%, is going to cover it. So if I change that, save it, you see here that that automatically changes the way it looks. So you can see instantly how that change is going to look by using brackets. So that's how it looks by changing the background image. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that because I don't like it. Save it, and it's going to go back to where we were. Okay, so most of the sections are within a div container, and this is where you set the overall look for those elements. I set the font size and line height in there. I didn't really need to set the text align center because we previously set it, but it was in there in case you want to change it. The header image content is in the template. There's a section at the top here for a header image. If you don't want a header image, that's fine. You don't need to put that in there, but it's there in case you want it. So that's how, if you don't use it, that doesn't matter. But I have this width set to 90%, so it will format it to give it a little border. Body text is to give you a little more control over areas that have the body text class. You only need to define the items that you want different than the base configuration. In this case, I set it to a width of 90% to keep the same margin as the rest of the page. Made the font size a little bit bigger and the color to be a gray color as opposed to the red that the rest of it is, to give it a little bit different. The next section is if you want a different formatting for the two different informational areas on the page. There's two informational areas on the page. The first one is this section here. Actually, there's three. Then you have this section here, and you have this section here. They have different tags, so you could change it if you want. In my case, I wanted them to all be the same, so I didn't need to put anything in here, so that's why it's commented out. The footer section is going to format how the footer looks, and that's the section down here at the bottom. And if you look at, it only formats the color and the style. It's not the actual text. The intro section is if you want a different format for the intro. The HR separator here, that's this border line right here. So if you want to change the way that looks, you can. It's got a radius around the edges. It has a margin at top to give you a little bit. If you want the color to change, all you have to do is just change it here, and you can change it to another color. Once you save it, that border is now going to be a different color. Save it back to green, and it's going to change. The playlist container is the section that's going to show your overall playlist. Again, I set it to 90 to keep a nice margin on it. This is going to be the text color. The text color is a subdued red. It's going to be aligned. The font size is going to be a little bit bigger, and the font weight bold. And that's what is going to be here in your playlist section, down here where they're either going to vote for it or select it. So the RF titles is used to configure the title above all the imported data. So that's all of these here where it says selected songs, next selection, playing now. That's to format that in case you want it to be a little bit different format than the rest. And again, like I said, that's only if you want it to be different than the rest. If you notice here, the bottom border, which is this line here, is just a little bit brighter than this one here, because the text color is a subdued red and that bottom border is a bright red. The R table, this is where the table is configured. You probably don't want to change that because that's part of the responsive part to make it wrap decently. The cell vote playlist is used to configure the table where the remote Falcon list will show when you're using the voting mode. You shouldn't modify this with the exception of the font size, the border, and possibly the cursor properties. The cell vote is used to configure the table where the remote Falcon list will show when you're using the voting mode. You shouldn't modify this with the exception of the font size, the border, and the cursor properties. The jukebox list is used to configure the table where the remote Falcon list will show when you're using the jukebox mode. You really shouldn't do much here either with the exception of changing the fonts and stuff if you want a border or not. Now, it's not advisable to comment these sections out even though you're not using it, because these are only going to get used based on what your show is displaying. So if you change your mind and delete these, you're going to have to go back and try and recreate them. It doesn't have any impact having it if you don't use it, but it's going to be available. This section here is to format how the button looks. You can change the color, how it looks, and that's the submit button down here where it says visit our website, so you can change the way that looks if you want. The submit and submit hover are just other attributes for the button. Now the enter request successful, this is how the message shows up if um, they do a request that's successful. You can change the way that it looks, how how wide it is, how big, and the same thing with the failed info. That's just to change the way that that looks. So now we're at the end of the style, and now we're going to get into the regular HTML code. So here, this says enter your show title. So if you want to have some sort of show title here, you would enter that. So I could put so if I want a title to be that, you can see that's how it looks. If you want a picture in your header up here in this section, then you would put in your image there. And again, like I specified, you need to have the image hosted on a secure server. So we'll put in an image here, and if we save it, you can see now how it puts the image. Now that's the full-size image, so depending on how it is, you might not want it to be quite so big, because it took the image and it put it 90% of the page. So it's just going to be how you want it. But if you see, it does scale down however the width of the device is. So whatever it is that you want it to look, that's up to you. So the intro is going to be this intro here. So you put in your intro title. I wanted a break to go on a different line. Put it in there. And that section is enclosed with a div. Any of these items that have a starting and ending div element, you can cut and paste those in other areas to change the order up and down how it goes. So the next div is the description here. And if you notice, this one has a class of a body text, which will use the information from the body text class here. So it's going to set the width to 90%. The color is going to be a gray. It's going to be centered, and the font is 18 pixels. Then it has the class separator, which is the green line, and like I said, you can put any of these wherever you want it. Now the next section, this here, make sure you don't change that portion there. Any of the things that's in brackets, that's important for Remote Falcon to need to be able to display your show the way you want it. So this section is only going to display if you're in the voting mode. Now, even though you might not be using the voting mode now, you probably don't want to comment this out or delete it, because you might change your mind later. Remote Falcon will automatically handle whether this gets displayed or not. The same thing in the next section, the jukebox dynamic container. That's the same thing. It's only going to display if you're using it, so you probably don't want to change that either. So this next section is used where maybe you want to put your instructions, which is down here where I got pick your favorites. And there's actually two different sections that are used if you're going to use the voting method or if you're going to use the jukebox method. So that way, if you switch, it's just a matter of changing it on your web interface for Remote Falcon, and this will automatically display the correct information, because one time you're going to select it, another one you're voting it, so you might want the text different. So you can just leave those and select the text, and you can go back and forth. Then I got another separator, and then the same thing here. You've got the sections for if it's going to show depending on how you're going to use the method, if it's voting or if it's the jukebox. Now this section here is how to format the display messages, whether it's the error or not. So this will show if you want what the text you wanted. Now they are set to display none. You want those set to display none in your template because you don't want the message to show up until they're needed. Remote Falcon will automatically change that to display how it's supposed to look at the time. But if you want to see temporarily what it looks like, you can change this to block. Save it. And then you can see here what that looks like. And if you don't like the color of the box or the color of the text, that is identified and the request successful. So you go up here to the request successful and you change it here. So this has the text of kind of an off-white. If the color is green, say you want that to be red instead of green, you can change it to red. And now you can see, but that text, we had the same color. So we had red with red, doesn't show up too well. So put it back to how it was. And then the request failed, same thing. Let's put this back to none. And the request failed. Both of those are in the style that's up above, and then you have the already voted. So these you don't want to change too much except for maybe the message and what it displays and maybe the colors. Then we have another separator, and then we have the footer, whatever's in there. At the bottom part is the social media. If you have the social media stuff, enter it in there. You'll have to enter your actual profile for Facebook or whatever it is for the ones that you participate in. So modify those how you want, and that's basically it. I hope this helps and that this template works out for you.